slide?
Yes, but we see it not in a slideshow format.
So you see the whole like in presenter view.
Yes, it's presenter view.
Okay. Let me
now
see.
we see it in slideshow format.
Yeah.
Now we see in PowerPoint file format.
Okay, perfect.
Great now.
Let me see if I can. Okay. I just want to understand if you can actually see even when I keep scrolling from one slide to the other.
This slide has not moved. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, yeah, this is the title of the presentation. So it's so first of all, thank you, Rika, for introducing the topic already. Use with these first minutes, and sorry for apologize for this slight delay. Yeah, so this is actually a part of my PhD, which I conducted under the supervision of Professor Michael Four and Luigi Franzoni. This was at Rotterdam University and Bologna University. The whole project was called The Law and Economics of Environmental Damage Assessment. So for today, I wanted to propose this study, which is a focus on what happens in case of marine disasters, how the compensation is calculated, and whether actually the amount of compensation in the end can be considered as enough or to use economic terms optimal in order to provide incentives for deterrence, but also for ecological restoration. And this is actually the way I try to blend together economic concepts together with ecological frameworks in my PhD. So for today, what I wanted to do is to introduce first the topic, to describe shortly this phenomenon of oil spills around the globe, and show you some data about the evolution of oil spills. Then I will go into the theoretical frameworks to classify the consequences of oil spills. And I will show some possible classifications in the literature, which I found in the literature. Then I delve into the empirical analysis. So I propose a comparative examination of 4 different important marine disasters, starting from the Amoco Cadiz, and then the Exxon Valdez, the Erika oil spill, and the Prestige incidents. And then I will summarize some determinants, let's say I call them cross-case determinants, which tend to influence the quantum of compensation. And I conclude with some recommendations to how to reconcile deterrence and restoration in an efficient way. So let me start from some information about oil spills around the globe. Actually, there is this important report from ITOPF, which actually revealed that normally during the last years, we had a large reduction in a very important reduction in frequency and tonnage of medium and large tanker spills. And they took cases from 1970 until 2024, and they show this important trend, which I will show in the next slide, also with their graph. And this is actually despite the increasing amount of volume of commerce around the world, so of oil traded around the world. Now, the point is that this long-run decline is actually correlated with regulatory innovations and also some advancement in terms of safety regulations and also investments that were adopted by or made by ship owners. The real point is that there are still, even if the decline, so in the long term, we can see a decline in the number of, in the frequency and the importance of disasters, there are still very important extreme events happening every now and then. And I will show this in this slide. Here you can see exactly how the amount of accidents in like these big marine disasters evolved from 1970. So you can see how the number and the importance of accidents reduced. But at the same time, we still have important peaks every now and then. And the ones which I specifically focus on today are the Exxon Valdez, the Erika oil spill, the Prestige oil spill, and we don't have the Amoco Cadiz in this slide because in reality, the Amoco Cadiz was very old, was in the very first decade, but was actually not a huge oil spill, but the consequences in the sea were very important. So this is just to introduce the topic, and now I would like to show you these consequences of oil spills. So basically, in the literature we can find many different approaches, or I try to make a literature review of how economists approach the topic of the consequences of oil spill, how they describe them, and I found let's say three main frameworks which I want to propose to you. The first one is from Boniot and Rainelli, who are two French economists. They actually made the first analysis of the consequences of after the disaster of the Amoco Cadiz, and again after the Erika oil spill. What the starting point is that we can quantify in monetary terms natural damages to natural resources if we do have a measurable change of the demand related to the damaged environmental goods and services. If we can identify this change in the demand, then we can actually consider the loss of environmental services as part of the utility function of consumers, and we can quantify all the losses from the perspective of the welfare theory, which is the theory adopted by economists normally when they quantify these economic damages. In this framework, you can see that they distinguish between direct effects and indirect effects. In the direct effects, we see they put cleanup costs and restoration costs because these are immediate financial losses. And then in the indirect effects of pollution, we do have all these huge variety of indirect damages, which include marine resources damages, loss of tourism activities, and of course related financial losses, loss of recreation amenities, and also biodiversity. And of course, Bonior and Rainelli go also a bit further, and they also propose different methods to quantify all these voices of damages. And the interesting part is that when it comes to indirect damages, and especially biodiversity, and in their framework they mention flora and fauna losses, they actually refer more to what we call the contingent evaluation methodology as a method to quantify them. So because we don't have direct cost. Another framework that is very important in the literature is always from French economists, Hay and Thibault, from 2006, and they proposed a more detailed categorization of the consequences, which include actually changes in regulations, changes in consumption and production habits of different economic agents, changes in the consumer and producer surplus due to direct and indirect modifications, and mitigation measures, And what I want to emphasize is that mitigation measures here, cleanup and restoration costs, are actually outside the framework. So these are something that you can introduce, you have as a cost, but they tend to limit the whole overall amount of cost. Actually, all these changes that you see listed on the right side of the slide are then put in this classification on the left side, where they actually divide it between ecosystems, regulation, and market. And within the consequences on ecosystem, they show direct, indirect, and non-use losses. What I want to also point out is that they use this interesting term, which is strict ecological damage, to refer to just indirect and non-use non-use value losses. And this is a term which I found, especially in this theoretical framework, very enlightening, because we tend to talk about very generally about ecological damages, also including cleanup and restoration costs. But the very strict ecological damages are only the impacts basically on nature. And the impacts on species, the impacts on biodiversity, which is non-use value of nature always from economic perspective. Now, to compare with the last framework, I will be very quick on this. This is a framework which is actually proposed from more ecological perspective, where this is actually a study from 2014. And they first, in order to analyze the consequences from an ecological perspective, you first start from the ecological consequences, and you see the first gray boxes for the outcomes of the oil spill, and then the green boxes are the consequences of the oil spill on the ecosystems. And then the orange boxes are actually the consequences on the society, which include the short-term and long-term economic impacts. So I find it very interesting that approaching the topic from an ecological perspective, I find personally a bit more logical to show this in this way, but it's actually just the ecological perspective, because otherwise, from an economic one, the framework is completely different. Now, of course, they don't really, from an ecological perspective, the distinction is not really between monetary and non-monetary, but more about what's the impact on the ecosystems and how much of this impact can be then converted into monetary terms. So to summarize all these frameworks, what I found, my point is, instead of choosing one framework, I tried to collect all the insights from all these frameworks in order to analyze my case studies. And I ended up with this list, which is actually costs of cleanup and restoration, which are direct costs immediately after the accident. Then there are costs to the environment, the strict environmental damage, which include indirect costs and losses of non-use values, and then financial losses, including all types of costs for the society, for the market, and then human health damages. And in my PhD, in general, in my research, I leave on the side financial losses and human health damages, because we already know how to calculate them. There are already methodologies. What I wanted to focus more is on the category of strict environmental costs, especially, and also how these costs to the environment are actually compensated together with the cost of cleanup and restoration, which we normally think or see as the environmental cost. I think I can now go into the next slide. There is another point which I want to clarify. When there is an accident, and in this case, cleanup or oil spill accident, immediately the response is to do cleanup. So cleanup and not just restoration, but immediately cleaning up the whole damage. There are a lot of different methodologies of cleanup which can be used. They are normally divided into conventional, including mechanical and chemical dispersants. And then there are also more biological approaches, which include manual cleaning and bioremediation using oil-degrading microbes, which are a bit slower. So normally the conventional cleanup methods are very fast, but they have a strong environmental impact. And there are also other biological approaches which are more natural, and they are normally slower and less disruptive for the ecosystems, but they are more sustainable in the long run. Now, the point is that after in this graph, you can see that after we have an oil spill, normally this oil spill with a kind of variability in the community inside already in normal times. After the impact of the oil spill, there is normally a huge degradation of the community, ecosystem community. And then slowly, there is already a process of natural recovery happening very slowly. So this is what happens naturally without adopting any cleanup methodologies. So it's a slow process which is already in place. If we do take what happens after an accident, normally there are immediately some cleanup decisions which are taken. And if we compare, so I found these analyses in the literature where we can compare actually the level of pollution and the cost related to pollution and together with the natural process of restoration. Based on this literature, it's possible to see that the cost of incremental decontamination is actually opposite to the cost of recovering, with marginal benefits from these environmental quality improvements, which diminish as ecosystems tend to approach the baseline. Now, I understand this is a bit technical, it's a bit complicated to understand. The whole point is that normally it could be possible to find a perfect point where the marginal cost equals the marginal benefit. And in order to avoid over-cleaning, but normally the decision-making after these accidents is based on asymmetric information. And there are many pressures on the people that do the cleanup, including the public administrations or the insurers, such that it's almost impossible to take optimal cleanup decisions based on the perfect balance between ecological sensitivity, cost efficiency, logistical feasibility. And what we see is that after these accidents, there is a tendency into over-cleaning. So we spend more than what is needed in order to have immediately a perfectly clean environment in the short term, which is actually going to have a long-term ecological damage, which we could have avoided with better decisions on cleanup methodologies. There are also cases which I found in the literature where actually very cleanup decisions were adopted based on a very quick decision making. And only in a case where, for example, there was a very close protected area, the environmental authority, this was a case in France, for example, the environmental authority insisted and made pressure in order to avoid intensive cleaning, because the intensive cleaning would have damaged enormously the ecosystem of the protected area, which was very close to the place of the accident. But normally, if there are not, this is not very common, because normally they just, the insurers together with the public authorities, they're pretty much captured by private interest or maybe reputation together for the public, and they tend decisions which speed up the cleanup at the expense of the environmental health and scientific recommendations. So this was just to clarify what happens after an oil spill. So the consequences we saw, now the difficulty of a perfect cleanup decision. And now I want to focus on 4 case studies to show what happened in these cases and, well, actually show the importance of the strict environmental damage in the whole overall compensation of damages. The first case which I found is the Amoco Cadiz, which is very old, but one of the main cases discussed in the literature. It happened in 1978 in the northern coast of France. It was a very heavy accident, which contaminated 300 kilometers of the French coast. With a lot of damages, of course, on seabirds, invertebrates, oyster cultivation, seal populations. So the damage to the ecosystems were huge. What happened is that the French authorities used a lot of, well, they actually implemented a 6-month mechanical cleanup under a specific plan, which is called POLMAR, which is a plan where there is a collaboration between municipalities and regional authorities and the French national authority. And they try to tackle the damage across 6 months. When it comes to the litigation and the valuation outcomes, so in this case, well, this would require a bit more delving to the legislation of oil spills, which is normally involve the use of some international instruments where we do have a compensation fund already available for oil spills. In this case, France rejected to use these compensation fund available at the international level. And they, because there was already a quite low cap on the amount of damages, and they wanted to go through a transnational tort action, which lasted 14 years. In terms of biomass monetization, it was quite speculative. The court limited the recovery to only cleanup expenditures, and this we will see also in a table later. And the final award was around $200 million, which actually represents less than 2% of the scholarly, in the sense of a scientific evaluation of ecological losses. So it was not entirely covered, of course. Just a little part of the evaluation of ecological loss was covered by the final award. This is another very important case, the Exxon Valdez case. Here we actually, well, I think it's very important and well known already. It's a case from 1989, happening on the Alaskan coast. And there was a collision discharging almost 40,000 tons of crude oil, and also in this case, the damages to the environment were huge. The cleanup was actually extensive. So the company, the corporation Exxon Valdez, mobilized a lot of people. Of course, there was also insurance covering the damage. They also used a lot of bioremediation, and they tried to avoid chemical dispersants. When it comes to the settlement, well, the Exxon Valdez is well known for a very short litigation time, because the litigation was around, well, the case was settled around after 2 years, more or less. As I say, there was already insurance covering part of the damages. And it's interesting because in this case, they agreed on $2 billion for cleanup plus $900 million for natural resource damage settlement to be actually paid over 10 years. And when it comes to the methodology, they use the contingent evaluation methodology to assess passive use losses, which actually also included, or they were actually the same as the cleanup cost. In this case, they use All Pollution, they apply the All Pollution Act, eliminating liability caps for gross negligence and institutionalized trustee-led assessments, because in the US, in these environmental accidents, of course, we have immediately the intervention of trustees. But in this case was based on the application of the international law. The third case is the Erika case, which happened in France again. This was in 1999. Interesting. It happened 10 years after the Exxon Valdez, and it was, to be honest, not a huge release of oil, 20,000 tons of heavy fuel. But the problem is that because of the meteorological conditions and the sensitivity of the area, it produced a huge ecological damage because there was a very high wind and the oil was actually dispersing or was going everywhere along the coast. And also the coast was very sensitive, so the damage was still important. Also it took actually there was at sea recovery less of 3%, and the cleanup was actually taking a lot of time. In this case, was a very long process of cleanup during already the litigation which started. In this case, again, there was the damage was covered by the international law, but it was insufficient because there is a cap in the international law on liability for oil spill damages. And in addition to that, there was also national litigation, criminal liability. For example, their total was considered responsible or liable also from a criminal perspective. The Court of Cassation in the end stated that ecological harm could be compensated with environmental damages up to 200 million euros. And the litigation was, in this case, lasted 13 years. So a really long time. Now, there is another case, but I try to be very, very quick on this. This happened in Spain. The interesting part is, in this case, is also that, also in this case, the damages were partially covered by the compensation, the international fund. And then there was, even here, a long litigation process inside. And the final award included pure environmental damage for Spain, France, and Galicia. Actually, there are still arbitration cases which are still happening about this. Now, what I want to focus, because we are it's getting a bit late, I want to show, this is a chart based on literature. I'll try to move here. So here, I hope you can see, so in this chart, we actually see the different cases and the amount of especially the percentage of costs that were claimed, cleanup costs, for example, and the strict environmental costs, which represent a percentage of the estimated cost, the claimed cost, and the final cost paid to the victims. I think we can also come back to this later if we have questions or there are questions, because what is relevant of this chart is that if we compare the amount of damages that were estimated and then really bore in the different cases, the percentage of the strict environmental cost that was first estimated and then claimed and then paid to the victims is actually declining. So we see that there is, what I want to conclude from this comparison of cases is that normally the first claim is about cleanup costs, and then when it comes to strict environmental costs, the percentage is actually going to decline, both for what has been claimed and even more for what has been finally paid, agreed from courts to the victims. And so there are I summarized some factors. So what are the factors that determine a more adequate compensation amount in the end? Of course, we do have the actually law, the legal framework, and if we apply the international legal framework on liability, then unfortunately this legal framework doesn't cover strict environmental damages, because it's only covering costs. Unused damages are not exactly covered there. There was an expansion in the amount of damages that can be covered by the international legal framework, but it's not enough to cover the non-use damages. In the US, the role of the trustees was very important to accelerate the settlement and obtain also higher claims of environmental costs, environmental damages, including the strict environmental costs. Another important point is that when the litigation lasts much longer, it becomes very critical to actually compensate for the strict environmental cost, because after many years, the natural process of restoration is in place, and courts in France, especially in the Erika case, were less inclined to agree on compensating the environmental costs that were already restored. And of course, the financial solvency, so the presence of insurance, is actually very important to help in the compensating for the environmental damages. So these are just four factors that can be very important. And if we have to summarize some recommendations based on the fact that in these cases, we see that polluters not always and very rarely bear the full equivalent, the full environmental damage, and there are still externalities remaining on the society. It would be important to elevate for sure the fund ceilings, as we have seen already in the past evolution of the international laws on liability. And to have more financial insurance for this, and the involvement of the use of a science-based restoration process. Yeah, and I think I can stop here because it's a very complex topic. There is so much to say about the different cases, but I'm really eager to hear from you what sparked your attention, and if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, for the interesting presentation. And I have requests from some member who cannot attend, especially our US members who keep complaining about our scheduled time, and especially from one member who happened to be Exxon Valdez economist who do the calculation. If you can share to the group any published paper or your presentation for her to read later. So I give the floor to the audience if you have any question or comment or something you want to know further on this topic. One thing that is interested, especially in marine case, is it will
or maybe things which
Okay, we have some delay on, okay. For me personally, the thing that I'm interested is that in marine case, there's a highly chance of having a transnational tort, as you mentioned earlier. And then in such case, probably each court will have their own experience and tendency on how to assess the damage. And also, you mentioned in the slide that only 10% of the economic valuation is granted by the court. And I would like to ask, because I've talked to judges and sometimes it's really huge. So for them, it's kind of unbelievable. And there are some legal constraint for them to grant everything. Like they talk about the fairness principle, or like this total value have a lot of variable that play into them, and whether we should burden everything to the single polluters. So from the case study that you've explored, what is like, why 10%? And do you think it's fair to grant the total economic valuation, or liability should have like a cap on to what extent we can hold polluters liable?
Yeah, thank you, Rita, because this is a very crucial point. Why and how basically we need to improve the compensation amount. So about the why, I think looking at the different cases, in different cases there are different whys. I noticed, for example, that in France, a very important why such a very low claim for environmental damages is because of the difficulty of paying for assessing environmental damages. So the complexity of the different methodologies that need to be used if we want to quantify the pure environmental damages, the cost related to the different methods. Another point in France, which I found crucial, is the fragmentation of the legal system and the fact that many different bodies, authorities could actually sue the tanker, so the ship owner, for damages. But this created a huge amount of litigation, of lawsuits which were raised. And every plaintiff, so the municipality, and there were many municipalities on the coast, the region, also the state, of course, they all use different methods to quantify the damages based on different approaches. So, for example, the state was using a methodology which was more about loss of taxation, even that. So the amount or the variety of plaintiffs that can sue for pure environmental damages was creating already a big problem in the choice of a methodology, and a good also work for the judges, for the courts, to actually come up with just one final amount. And I think the cost and the technicality of assessing pure environmental damages are a problem for plaintiffs, especially when we have many plaintiffs allowed to sue for environmental damages. And of course, this tends to go more in the direction of cleanup, because cleanup is a financial loss which is can be very quickly assessed, but it's not enough. So do we need to change the system? Do we need to find a different approach so that polluters pay the whole? From my point of view, I think, well, we should increase the amount of compensation, because if it's just about cleanup, I fear that then this creates a tendency for using very quick very intense cleanup methodologies to in order to immediately show that the beach has been cleaned and there is no damage anymore. But we had also the assessment of the environmental damages. This should be included also in the whole framework. And I still feel that this is needed to raise the amount of compensation. Of course, then the restoration process takes decades. It's not just, and I feel that this might be too much for the polluter to bear a restoration process which lasts over decades. And there we would need more involvement of the population there, which is actually also, so in the Exxon Valdez case, the trustee made a nice restoration plan, which also involved the public opinion, or also the opinions of the people, and how to change or how to achieve the restoration across a long span, so in the long term. And I think this is still missing now, especially in Europe. So I think we should do better. So we should compensate more, including also better calculation of environmental damages in the long term. I cannot hear you.
Sorry, I moved. Yeah, please, Jacob, go ahead.
Thanks, Francesca. Really interesting and useful to hear about these examples, lots of which we're kind of aware of in general terms, but useful to see them broken up and structured like that. One of the main reasons when we speak with, public interest lawyers and prosecutors for why, and I'm across contexts, whether it's Indonesia or Uganda, the reason that we're not seeing more of these cases, I would say one of the two main reasons are, one, there's not a lot of precedent case. So, there's no cases and thus there's no cases. It's that negative feedback. But the other one is, we're not economists. We don't know how to do this. And you have just illustrated to us incredibly elegantly that nobody knows how to do this. Every municipality uses different methods. Even if you come up with economic valuation, the judge gives you 2% or 10% or ignores it. And it kind of brings me to a question was, well, if the pure math of economics is being ignored and is so variable, that doesn't mean that there's no absolute truth, but it definitely means that in a litigation context, there's going to be challenges. And again, we're hearing from practitioners, this stops us from even bringing cases. So from a pragmatic standpoint, the thing that, Rika and I and so many colleagues are struggling with is, so what do we do? How do we create cases in a context where the science is a literal insurmountable barrier to even entering the discussion, and where even if we bring it, we know that the judges will not be able to engage with it, because even in the jurisdictions where they've got 30 years of experience, they're not doing a good job. So my question to you, and it's a very unfair one, is pragmatically, where do we go from here with creating damage claims that are meaningful, that are big enough, but also that don't create a barrier to justice?
Yeah, no, Jacopo, this is also, I think it's a question that has been always in my head during the PhD. Apart from analyzing what's happening, then what? I have to be honest, I went through different frameworks proposed by ecologists to classify environmental damages. I think we should go more into the ecosystem service approach, like the ecosystem service evaluation with the different categories. But I still fear that even proposing the values of ecosystem services, which is pretty, I would say it's a easy to read framework classification, although we can still say that is not enough, is not perfectly, we can also criticize it. But I would try to use that to push more for that, but I fear that even that could be considered as not scientifically valid, not scientifically reliable, because still there is, there is already in the law, we do talk about ecosystem services, but there is no mention about the ecosystem service valuation database, for example. It's still, the science is still trying to find a consensus, no, on this valuation. But I do think that this methodology should be proposed a bit more in litigation. Try to bring it more and more often. I would see some benefits in using these instead of relying just on the cleanup costs or like these financial losses and then maybe some market costs. I don't really support the contingent evaluation methodology because I see that this is what, as you say, is not fair because you need a lot of money to do a survey. Maybe you can try to use data from other cases, the benefits transfer. This was happening also in the US in some cases. But well, it could be to use data from contingent evaluation studies, even in other countries, in other places. But I would really support more the use of the values of ecosystem services as a methodology, because I think it's still easier. The only thing is that we need to persuade judges to use this. And ideally, there should be a kind of scientific report where they actually validate the use of this methodology. So then you can also say, well, IPBS or IPCC, they are saying this is the methodology to go. But this is another journey then, because this is about science, policy interface, and how to find. So maybe one side is to propose another methodology, and the other side is actually try to collaborate more with scientists and try to have a kind of scientific report on this. Maybe this is, these are two ways.
Valerie?
Yeah, thank you for a very, very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Francesca. As Jacob said, unfortunately, Carol, our colleague from the US, who was the economist for the Exxon Valdez, cannot be with us. And she said something, a couple of years ago that I never knew. The reason that they use contingent valuation was because the Exxon Valdez happened in Alaska and there weren't many people. And so they couldn't use another system there. So that's when they came in with this highly controversial contingent valuation. As I say, until Carol said that, I never knew that was the reason. My question is, if you use ecosystem services, you're only looking at compensation to people. So you're not looking at the loss of biodiversity to other natural resources, etc. So how would you factor that in if you're using ecosystem services?
Yeah, so Valerie, I was actually looking because in the ecosystem services you have the provisioning services, the regulatory services, and there is another category which is now going out of my mind.
There's four of them. I can't remember, but there's four different kinds of services. Yeah.
I still see, I know that there is a whole debate about the fact that also the ecosystem service approach is truly anthropocentric and looking at services to people. But I do think that within the category of regulatory services, there are also services for nature itself. So climate mitigation or okay, that was a bit my okay,
Yeah.
I need a confirmation about this.
No, I looked into this because as I get Rika and Jacob know, I get very, very boring on the Environmental Liability Directive, which is based on the loss of a natural resource to the public and to other natural resource services. So some time ago, I did a lot of research on ecosystem services, and it is purely anthropocentric. It isn't for other natural resources. And I have a problem with that. That just seems to be the direction we shouldn't be going in, just looking at everything that's of value to us.
Yeah, so I fully relate. I think we need to find a method which is actually not related to us. And there is another approach which I found recently. I don't know if you heard about this BioVal tool. Did you already hear about the BioVal tool? I would like to show you something because it's a very interesting methodology. And yeah, let me see if I can show you. I can try to share my screen. Let me see. So you are here, share. It's a method which, okay, now we go. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
So I know these people already since 3-4 years because they are conducting this project within the European Forum of Judges for the Environment. They came up just a few months ago. It's a very recent that they finalized the calculation method. This is at IMBO, the research institute at the Flemish region of Belgium. And what they did is they actually included all the values of nature: intrinsic, instrumental, relational. And the contribution to welfare, so the economic part, let's say, more related to humans, is only here. It's part of the instrumental values. So they use a kind of ecological framework to approach the topic, and then they include all these values. I really like that they also include the ecological importance, because if you destroy something, you should also take into account how this is important for the ecosystem. And the culture is partially related to society culture, but I do agree with that because sometimes this can also play a role. Yeah, and they actually made this kind of formula. And well, they have some cases here where you can see how they came up to different amounts for different species. I like this framework, I have to be honest. It's based, I mean, the people that came up with this framework are also intertwined with the IPBES, the last report of IPBES on the plural values of nature. So I do see something important to be used here. And I know, because you can see here, they made a section on the case law here, and they're actually starting to see where courts are accepting this methodology. They just started to collect these cases. These are very recent, so they just started now. The only thing is that this formula they are proposing is only for species, because they are only working on species right now. Well, you cannot start immediately with all the ecosystems, so they are focusing on species. I like this method, I have to be honest. They have, yeah, here you see the list of compensation based on their formula. Category animal, extinction risk, cultural significance, ecological significance. So, but I have to be honest, I was discussing this also with other people, and even in the ecological, I think I can stop sharing. Even in the ecological domain, ecologists criticize this formula. They say that it's not very, yeah, I know. So,
Jacob, please. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, then I don't know, because it's then I don't know. Yeah, maybe Jacob, you can also intervene and share your thoughts.
I mean, so Maribel and I sat on this group for quite a few years, to the point where we finally dropped out because we realized that the interest was on coming up with a legible number rather than coming up with either a scientifically justifiable number or a or any environmental restoration. And something that I've come to realize is that a judge will accept a number if they think it's credible, regardless of whether they understand it. And this creates the illusion of credibility. But scientifically, justice-wise, these are very smart, nice people, but the math is bullshit, like very genuinely, and ecologically as well. But it achieves the goal of coming up with a number. And the judge who's leading this initiative comes from he was originally a traffic judge and wanted something analogous to parking fines. He said, if you park in a fire lane, you get charged this much. If you park in front of a school, and he wanted the same sort of convenience for the environment. And I totally get it, which is that you have to have something that's easy and quick, and they're very busy. But I think it's one of the most misguided but well-intentioned environmental evaluation efforts for two reasons. One is that the numbers are not accurate. And I think that the truth matters, even if they're convenient. I think the truth still matters. And the second thing is, by conflating environmental remedies with parking fines, it focuses purely on coming up with a cash value. So that case that you just showed us, 62,000 euros, is based on some magic calculation of the value of one scarlet bunting or whatever. But it has no attention to what sorts of actions we're going to have to take for remedies. And that's what gets me so fired up. Now, I know, Francesca, in your discussions, you're saying, no, we need to think about cleanup, whatever the analog, restoration or whatever. We should also be thinking about value. But this flips it the other way around. It doesn't even care about remedies. It just wants a dollar value. And I think we can all agree there's a difference between fine sanctions and remedial actions. And this just conflates them in a way that, just drives me nuts, as you can detect.
Can I just
I love
say,
the framework. The framework makes sense. The math doesn't.
I agree with everything Jacob has just said is bullshit. I mean, I know Luke Laveryson, I know Farah Bukel. I've worked with Farah. I've worked with them both in the past. But it's just a way for a judge to come up with a figure that doesn't resemble any reality. And I've attended one of the BioVal meetings as well, and I was totally unimpressed. I know Maribel was doing a lot of work on this as well. She knows it far better than I do, as did Jacob, but no, this is not the answer. Sorry, Francesca. You're outnumbered.
You don't have an answer, right? That's the reality.
No, but I know it's debated, and I know I heard already this criticism. This is why I don't go immediately to propose this. I don't propose it immediately, but I still see a point in proposing a formula, which, as Jacob said, we need something easy, because otherwise this whole system becomes unfair, because you can't expect polluters from plaintiffs without enough money to pay for the damage assessment to propose. Otherwise, we have what happened in the French case, where they were proposing one euro for environmental damage. And we cannot have this, because then it's better to have a bullshit formula, maybe. So I don't know, but I want to, my question is there a way really to have a better formula, which is more based on science, but still easy to apply? That's the question. Can we realistically have this, or we do have to stay with bullshit anyway?
And we do not have an answer to this question. That's the reality, right? These are not new questions, and we don't have answers to them. So, and I think we're all trying it in different ways, all quite similar, but different ways. We're going to be approaching all of you, Rika and I and colleagues, in the next probably few weeks with an invitation to contribute to a framework that we're going to be publishing from the IUCN through WCEL. That is a proposal for damage claim formation in environmental cases. And Francesca, you may not agree with it. And I think this will be the interesting point. It very much advances kind of where our thinking is, and there's no economic valuation involved at all. It is all about primary restoration, which you would agree with, cleanup, but then everything that might be additional is addressed through compensatory additional restoration action. So you clean up the pollution, and that takes care of 30% of the action, 30% of the harm. But we also make sure that there's a long time horizon, which let's say takes care of 50%. There's still 50%, and that might be interim loss, it might be cascading effects. All of that we propose through compensatory actions. And following the ELD, if there is economic valuation, that is, if I'm not mistaken, Valerie, that's bottom of the list. And we don't even get into it because, well, because it's going to require some sort of very complicated magic math. And we recognize that if we provide a valuation option, people will take it. So we have to focus on a remedies oriented. And by remedies, I mean actions like cleanup, restoration, improved monitoring, improved technologies, yada, yada. It's also imperfect, but we'll be inviting you to give some ideas because, sorry, and just to add, because the reason that we're also doing it is because practitioners have asked us for something easy that they can use to explain to litigators and to judges. And they've actually asked us, okay, well, if you're going to ask for restoration actions instead of a formula, can you create a checklist of like, okay, in this type of harm, these are the sorts of remedial actions. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. Like, if there's a pollution cleanup, these might be the sorts of things that you might want to do. If there's a wildlife trade, these are the sorts of actions that you might want to do that then could be presented to the public trustee or to the public interest lawyer or whatever to go through and be like, okay, the scientists say in this sort of case, these are the sorts of actions we should take. And then where the economic comes in is in the procurement cost, the cost of undertaking that action. Like, it's not novel. We're just trying to strip it down to something super usable, which I don't know.
I only have a point, maybe more from the law and economics perspective. So how to give to the polluter a signal, clear signal of what kind of liability will incur in case of causing an accident. I don't want to say that this needs to be perfectly predictable, but overall, I mean, you know, the law and economics theory is actually saying that we should, I mean, if we really want deterrence, we should be able to give an idea of what kind of financial, like, because even the actions that you are mentioning, in the end, we can convert them in money. But so a polluter is still a business as usual thinker. So how can we communicate in monetary terms to the mind of the polluter? This is the point. But I fully agree with the idea of talking about restoration and remedies. I fully agree. This was also my point of delving into the cleanup and discovering that in the end we are doing more damage than what we want by cleaning up. And this is the problem. If we just talk about compensating cleanup costs, it's a problem. But this is about how you do cleanup. So then we should also promote legislation that actually avoid intensive cleaning up methodologies. So maybe this is another point. Because this is about how you do the cleanup, guidelines, other things. So maybe the solutions are on different levels. So it's small and multiple. But I wonder how to convert this list of actions into a language that is understandable from businesses. This is my question then.
At the end, business actor will think in terms of cost and benefit, and money it's like easier to grasp. Okay, for the last part, is there any question from Anja, Meow Meow, Laina, or Adrien here? If not, it's a very condensed and heavy 1 hour. So I hope you can share the material, like shareable material to the group so people can digest it further. And as Jacob also mentioned, we have several material that we would like to share to BELS to get input also. Thank you so much for your 1 hour time. Oh yeah, Francesca, you, okay.
Just to thank you, because I really love this opportunity of discussion, and I love the possibility of having a very, well, I feel that we all discuss with looking in the same direction, and I really appreciate this possibility. So thank you a lot for this space and time, and thank you for the very engaging discussion we had.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you. Yeah, and Carol is waiting for your paper.
Yes, I will. I can send everything. Yes.
Okay. Thank
Thanks
you,
so
and
much.
see you
Thank you,
in
everyone, for making time. Yeah.
next 2 months. If you have any suggestion on the topic or you want to present your own topic to the meeting, please let us know.
Right.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.